Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. The population argument is on the front burner again. In September, a massive UN conference will take place in Cairo. World population is way up. Some people fear that the so-called population bomb is exploding. Others say it's no big deal. Joining us to sort through the conflict and the consensus are Jessica Matthews, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former Deputy to the Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs in the Clinton administration, Samuel Preston of the University of Pennsylvania and former President of the Population Association of America, John Bongaarts, Director of Research at the Population Council, and Professor Julian Simon of the University of Maryland and author of the soon-to-be reissued bestseller, The Ultimate Resource. The question before this House is population a problem? This week on Think Tank. In the 1960s, some experts warned that a population bomb was ticking and predicted that worldwide famine was inevitable. Now, fears of global famine are receding, but some worry that the fallout from the population bomb may devastate the Earth's natural environment. Okay, let's look first at those population trends. Now, this is a familiar chart. For most of recorded history, the number of people remained below 1 billion. But since 1800, the population has increased to 5.6 billion, and more people are on the way. In the next decade alone, 1 billion more will be added. According to the United Nations medium growth scenario, world population will likely double by the year 2150 and then level off. But remember, that's a projection, not a prediction. Will it prove to be correct? Well, it assumes that global total fertility rates will fall to the point where, on average, women will bear 2.1 children. That is the so-called replacement rate, at which a modern population is stabilized over time. But look at this. In the developed world, in the modernized countries, that's us, fertility rates have already fallen well below that replacement level. In just 30 years, the number of children per woman dropped from 2.8 to 1.8, and in fact, rates are down to 1.5 in Japan and down to 1.3 in Spain and in Italy. At these rates, excluding any massive immigration, modern countries will lose population and keep on losing it. But the argument is made, isn't the real problem in the non-modernized, less developed countries? Well, those fertility rates indeed are well above replacement, but they too are declining steeply. In 1960, there were 6.1 births per woman in the third world. Today, it is 3.6 and falling dramatically. For example, fertility in Mexico and Brazil dropped by 50%, in Egypt 42%, and Thailand's is down by 64%. So what's going to happen? For the year 2050, that's not so far away, many of our viewers should still be around, the UN's medium projection, based on that rate of 2.1 children per woman, yields a population of 10 billion people. But when the UN changes the assumption by increasing fertility just slightly from 2.1 to 2.17 children, then that tiny shift would add 2.5 billion more people for a total of 12.5 billion. But suppose global fertility drops a little bit to 1.96 children, which happens to be higher than the 1.8 of the modern countries today, then world population will only reach 7.8 billion. And look what happens in that case. Remember this chart? It's based on that medium projection. But if world population follows the UN's medium-low projection, population will grow, but top out at only about 7.8 billion in 2050, and then start declining. And by 2150, we're pretty much back where we are today at 5.6 billion people, and the population continues to shrink. Jessica Matthews, is the moral of these data that small changes now can yield massive changes later on?
It's part of it. Clearly, population momentum is an enormous driving force. Put it in individual terms, if a woman today has 3 children, she'll have 27 great-grandchildren. If she has 6, she'll have 216. And so that gives you a sense of how precious time is if you want to end up closer to 8 billion than 12 billion. So I think that's the other lesson of these numbers that you've shown, which is that action now translates. We have in our hands now the potential to make a huge difference in the quality of life down the road, 2050.
Sam Preston, you go along with that?
Yeah, I think that's correct. One thing that is not brought out very clearly in those data is that the death rate is continuing to decline. So that although there has been a sizable reduction in the rate of fertility among women in developing countries, the growth rate is actually not very much lower than it was in 1965.
This whole population explosion thing that people are so concerned about, after all, does come out of something good, doesn't it? Which
Absolutely.
is that fewer babies are dying, people are living longer. Are we all agreed on that? That's
the increase in life expectancy during the 20th century, I think, has to be credited as our greatest single achievement. At the turn of the century, India, China, most of the third world had a life expectancy of 25. It's now close
25 years per person.
25 years
right.
per person. It's now over 60 for developing countries as a whole. At the turn of the century, the U.S. had a life expectancy of 49. It's now 76. That's what's driving the population explosion, and it really is a credit to the success of the human race in lowering death rates.
But now, John Bongaarts of the Population Council, that great blessing of longer life, you and your colleagues sense is a major problem as well?
Well, one thing I would like to add to the introduction, you're quite right in pointing out that small differences in fertility make a large difference in the long run. And that means that we should take now the actions we know will make a difference. We should take them urgently. The one thing we will have difficulty doing is changing population trends over the next few decades. We're now adding every year more people than in any year in history. During the 1990s, population will grow by about 1 billion, and the same thing again in the first 2 decades of the next century. So the climax of this unprecedented period of population growth still lies ahead of us in the next 3 decades.
Right. Julian, what do you think of all this?
I want to underline what Sam said, which is that the main driving force for the growth in population has been our victory over early death. And that victory over early death has been, or premature death, has been largely achieved by our increased capacity to be able to produce more food and our conquest of the great environmental killers, the typhus, the cholera. So I would expect all lovers of humanity to be cheering at this miracle that we finally achieved.
Suppose if we let people have as many children as they want, global population went not to 10 billion, but to 15 billion or 20 billion or 30 billion. Is there a point at which you have a problem with the number of people in the world?
There's no known physical limit in the long run, and the physical constraints to population get less and less and less year after year. But I don't see that we need to look into the long-term future and try to make any policies about it now. In fact, when we've done that in the past, they have usually been policies which are exactly the opposite of what we would have wanted thereafter.
What do you mean?
Well, I don't agree with that.
Well,
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the lot of mankind has certainly improved in most places around the world, and that's a good thing, as we just discussed. But we're now at a point in history where we can look into the future. We have projections that we either might end up with about 8 billion people 50 years from now.
8 billion and then decline.
And then declining, or we could go to 15, 20 billion. Now, any reasonably informed group of citizens from anywhere in the world would vote for the 8 billion world rather than the 20 billion world. So if that's the case, then we should now take actions that will get us on the trajectory to 8 billion rather than on the 20 billion.
While we've had this population explosion in the 20th century, is there any argument that, on balance, the average earthling, the average person living in this world, is doing better than before? And so how can one say, well, the cause of this misery is too much population growth?
This is a classic, glass half empty, half full kind of debate, right? It depends.
It's 2/3 full. I mean,
Well,
the absolute level of affluence around the world, certainly in the developed
Right.
world, but in the less developed
Right.
world, has been going up.
Oh, no question.
While there's been a population explosion.
I think your question maybe gets at, is there an optimum population level on the planet And that's almost impossible one to answer. I can't. What we do know is that the effects of population growth are mediated through capital, through technology, and through institutions. Okay. We are not a perfect species. There is no question, I would agree, that the the planet can hold a lot more people than we have if we have enough capital, enough technology, and enough functioning institutions. But, as Sam said, it's population growth rates that overwhelm institutional development. And countries that are trying to provide housing, food, and shelter, and education for a rapidly growing population do not also have the capital to produce the jobs to employ them. And so it becomes a terrible trade-off.
Ben, can I come back to your question? And that is the world is better off. There's no question about it. Most statistics you look at, except for some environmental ones, we are now better off than decades ago. And at the same time, population has been growing rapidly. But the answer, seems to me, to your question is simple. We would have been better off still if population growth has been less rapid.
Julian Simon, is population growth harmful?
Well, of course, more people are harmful, and more people are a problem. Every parent knows that. But it's not just harmful. More people are also beneficial. People not only cut down trees, they also plant trees. People not only degrade the soil in some farms, but they in fact replenish the soil in other places and leave continents better than they ever were before. Europe, as you know so well, John, has more trees growing now than it did 50 years ago, and the farms are better tended than ever before. So that yes, there's harm, but yes, there's benefit, and on balance, there's a little bit more benefit each generation, which is the reason that each of our generations is a little richer than the generation that came before.
So you say we are better off because there is more population?
That's a little more complicated. I believe it, but certainly there's a correlation that we've had more people over time living longer and more healthily with more resources.
But you also just said, I just want to pin your position down before going to some other, you also say it's neutral. The population growth.
That's what the data show.
The data show that it's
neutral.
There's
no correlation.
And the data show it's neutral, and your intuition says it's positive.
Yes, in the long run.
I can't believe, though, that you didn't leap all over John a minute ago when he said that we would have done better economically if population growth had been slower.
I would have if I had time.
All right.
You don't agree with Julian?
Oh, it goes back to the point you made earlier. Is there a limit? 10, 20 billion, 30 billion? Or are we the guy who jumped off the Empire State Building and passed the 20th floor and said, gee, it's been fine so far?
As a market economist, do you buy that equation that more people means a worse economy?
I think in general, yes, I do, that wages will be slightly lower if Bangladesh grows faster than if it grows slower. It is not a major factor in differentiating between poor countries and rich countries. In my view, the evidence on the relationship between population growth and economic development is not of a kind that would support the use of compulsory programs in population control. It is, on the other hand, strongly supportive, I think, of family planning programs. And in fact, I think even Julian has expressed himself as being supportive of subsidized family planning programs.
Why do you say even me? Listen, strongest supporters you could possibly imagine, Sam.
Even I have come out.
There you go.
I am not against, and I've sort of been, as you know, a hawk on this argument. I'm not against the UN or anybody else spending money on voluntary family planning. Are you, Julian?
Absolutely not. No. It's part of our efforts to help people get one of the most important things they can get in this world, and that's the family size they want. And any lover of liberty has got to be in favor of that.
It seems to me
And that's the whole story.
You're wiggling around.
No,
You're sometimes seeming to suggest that unfettered population growth to any level is a good thing, and other times you back away from that. Where do you really stand?
I stand first as a believer in liberty, Jessica.
We're all agreed on that.
But we're not all in favor of it.
Oh, yes, we are.
Those people who are in favor of the Chinese system are not lovers of liberty.
Well,
oh my goodness, that's a whole long story.
There were people, and are people today in the population movement who do a lot of apologizing for China. Let's put it that way, and a lot of ignoring of what's going on there.
I think it's a tiny minority.
China won an award from the UN Fund for Population Activities 2 or 3 years ago for its family planning, so-called family planning program. It has gotten the endorsement of the United Nations.
And that is a
respect.
coercive policy.
I think it's coercive.
Do you think it's coercive, Jessica?
Yes.
Do you think it's coercive, John?
Yes, but I think I would like to point out, the thing that most people are unhappy about is the one-child family, and that's when the coercive element came in. What people don't realize is that most of the fertility decline in China, from about 6 children in the 1960s to close to 2 in the late 70s, occurred before the one-child policy was implemented. So in my view, the Chinese government would have been better off forgetting about the one-child policy and keeping with the policy they had in the 70s, which was closer to a voluntary family planning program that we have in other countries.
Now, let me turn to another problem, which is among those that are always brought up in this argument of whether population is harmful, which is, are we running out of resources? Are we running out of resources?
We're running out of some. There are certainly clear signs of stress, as I said, in the agricultural sector, soil, groundwater, and the productivity of soil. Since World War II, 11% of the Earth's vegetative surface has lost either a large amount or all of its productivity. That's a loss we can very ill afford. We are, in many key places, running out of groundwater. That is, there are lots of parts of the world where surface water that's replenished every year is used completely and groundwater is being mined. That's like a fossil fuel. You use it once.
Well, you brought up fossil fuels. I mean, 20 years ago, everyone was saying we're running out of oil, we're running out of oil. It's a non-renewable resource. Now you can take baths in oil. The price of oil has come way down.
Right.
There is a plethora of oil. Wasn't somebody wrong? I mean, that whole Club of Rome study that said, "Oh my God, we're running out of everything,"
right.
And we keep not running out of everything.
That's true. Technology, and that's a good sign. I go there, and that's what policy studies that say, "Hey, we're heading to trouble," are for. I mean, that's what I think people always forget when they engage in this kind of debate. The idea is to say, "Hey, we're heading towards trouble, let's change policy," and we did.
John,
So,
you've written on this from an agricultural point of view. Are we running out of food?
No, the world can produce ample food for the average citizen of the world. And in fact, we probably can accommodate a larger population. But again, there are large numbers of people who have not enough to eat. The cause of hunger in the world is poverty. But population growth is a major contributing factor to poverty. So indirectly, population growth contributes to hunger.
Sam?
I don't disagree with that. And I don't think markets are the panacea for all human problems.
But market economies
grow
function
better than non-market economies.
Do we all agree on that?
sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because I was a delegate to that 1984 population conference, and we got into this great argument that somebody pinned the label on the American delegation, which I don't think we ever said, was that capitalism is the best contraceptive. And people said, "Oh my God, isn't that a terrible thing?" When in point of fact, if you say that market economies do grow faster and that more affluence does lower fertility, one can certainly make the case, if not of capitalism being the best contraceptive, that capitalism or market economies are a fine contraceptive.
Not alone, they're not. I'm a very affluent person. If I didn't have a contraceptive, I'd probably have 6 children instead of 2. So there's plenty other, so they're not a contraceptive at all, right? Economic growth accelerates fertility decline. There's no debate about that, I think. I think that old debate is gone. And that old bumper sticker, development is the best contraceptive, capitalism is the best contraceptive, it's all misleading. It doesn't help us understand.
But every country, every modern market economy has had a plunging fertility
But
rate.
John raised the point earlier. An awful lot depends on the rate at which this happens, so that institutions can keep up. And the base that you're starting from, because we're talking about exponential growth. So the bigger your base, the bigger your annual increment, and how much capital you have to deal with the problems that the growth deals. I don't think there's really any debate on that.
That it doesn't matter. That in other words, diminishing fertility will happen. This is a meaningless argument, whether it's capitalism or contraceptive. They're sort of all linked together, and both things have to happen, and both things are happening. Are you prepared to accept that?
You know,
Yeah, See, I think both are important. In other words, the reason why fertility declined is because people started adopting contraception. Okay, so contraception explains almost the entire fertility decline. The next question is, why did people adopt contraception? And that is because of development. They want fewer children and they start using contraception. So you cannot say it's contraception or development. It is contraception, and contraceptive increase is attributable to development. Plus development, plus the efforts made by many governments to help women through family planning programs.
Sam Preston, I guess Paul Ehrlich and others have made the case that more affluence yields more pollution. And yet, when you look at certain comparable societies, for example, Western Europe and the old Eastern Europe, Western Europe was more affluent and much cleaner, and Eastern Europe with lower affluence was an ecological slum.
Well, in fact, the 1992 World Development Report of the World Bank was devoted to the environment, and it concluded that affluence was associated with less pollution. That is, in general, the United States and Western Europe used technologies that were, in fact, less polluting than was the case in poorer countries. So that, in fact, there is a confirmation that things do, in fact, tend to get better with affluence, as we expect all
This is a
indicators
very-
to do.
In
Ben, I
direct
think
contradiction to what the Paul Ehrlich people have
It's
said.
direct contradiction to the IPAT equation, which tries to express
Could you explain how you-
the impact, environmental impact, as a product of population size, affluence, that is income per head, and then a technology which is
John
pollutants
Bongaarts,
per-
how does the Population Council, or how do you come out on that?
Well, on this particular argument, yes. The reason why...
That affluence helps us clean
Yes,
up the environment,
because
not
that's
makes it
correct.
worse.
Yeah. You have simply more resources available to address this issue. You can buy a cleaner environment, but it is costly to do so. And in the poor countries of the world, people simply don't have the resources to deal with all the problems that are created there. And in the vicious cycle, poverty, population growth, and environmental degradation.
So what we need to clean up the environment is affluence.
Exactly.
Would you all care, just for the record, to tell us out in the future at what number the world's population will top out, and will it then decline thereafter? Anybody like to take a shot at that, John?
We're going to probably be very close to the median projection, which you showed earlier, which is around 10 or 11 billion in the year 2100. If, however, we make now efforts and take the actions that we know will make a difference, then we can end up with about 8 billion. And I think we should do that.
Sam, how many people are there going to be?
Well, I think we'll go to 10 billion, probably. I think that the UN's medium projection makes a lot of sense. I think it's important to recognize that there is a momentum to population decline, just as there is a momentum to population growth. And it is, in fact, the case that if you get to 10 billion through below replacement fertility level, you then are inevitably going to have a period of population decline.
It's plausible that 100 years from now, in this very studio, we're going to have five people sitting around saying, what are we going to do about the population implosion? We are losing people.
In Japan, it's already, I think, the number one social issue is the rapid aging of the Japanese population produced by very low fertility. So yes, we can turn this debate completely around, and I don't think it's going to take 100 years.
Neither Julian nor Jessica gave me an answer yet as to how many people we're going to have. Do you care to make that prediction?
My crystal ball isn't really that good, but I think that modern communications technologies give us, at least raise the possibility that we could have far more rapid fertility declines than the UN population projections assume. If you look at countries like South Korea and Taiwan, which went through the demographic transition basically overnight in 13 years, just you see what communications can do. And if you think about what modern technology could do with education, it seems to me that it is at least possible, if we reach a consensus on the urgency of this issue, that we might come in closer to the low end of this is the optimistic
to the 8 billion or something like that.
Yeah.
Julian, you going to give us a number?
My guess is that growth will continue forever. But the important thing is
human population.
Human population, I think, will grow forever. But the important thing is, what do we do right now? Something or nothing, beside helping people get the family size.
So you're not going to give me a number. You're going to say it's going to keep growing forever.
Indefinite growth.
Okay. Professor Julian Simon, Dr. Samuel Preston, Dr. John Bongaarts, Dr. Jessica Matthews, I thank you all for joining us, and I thank you for joining us. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.